Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. It is Friday, February 5th. I'm your host for today, Dr. Zach Long, faculty inside of our Fitness Athlete division. It is the best day of the week here on the PT on Ice Daily Show. It is Fitness Athlete Friday, and I'm excited to be joining you today to talk about loading the quads in rehab, why we load them, when we want to load them, and then a few of my favorite exercises to really get after quad strength in all populations, but a little bit more specific to the fitness athlete. And then a couple of cues and things that I do that really help my patients get a little bit more out of their exercise prescription when we are specifically getting after trying to improve quad strength. So let's start by discussing a couple of upcoming courses that we have here at ICE, live on the road again here in 2020, February 6th. So this weekend, we have our extremity management course in Washington, at Everett, Washington, and then we have monitor management of the older adult in Kansas. Next weekend, Jeff's heading down to Atlanta, Georgia to do lumbar spine management, February 13th in Atlanta. Then February 20th, Jeff is then flying all the way across the country. So going from Atlanta all the way to Anchorage, Alaska to do lumbar management. And I will be that weekend in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, doing the clinical management of the fitness athlete live course. So a lot of good courses coming out in the next couple of weeks out live. So let's get into today's topic. So let's discuss quadriceps loading in rehab. And let's first start by really, when do we want to specifically work on improving somebody's quad strength and or hypertrophy in the rehab setting? And number one qualification for if somebody's quads need to be stronger is, do they have any sort of knee injury or pain going on? I can't think of a single knee issue where adding quadriceps strength does not help. Whether we're talking about somebody with patellofemoral pain or somebody post-op ACL or total knee replacement, or somebody after a meniscus injury that hopefully they haven't had surgery on, but maybe they have if their doctor is maybe not as up to date on modern management of meniscus injuries. So a couple of things, though, that will really indicate to me that our exercise prescription might need to be more and more biased towards knee strength. Number one, for me, working with fitness athletes is going to be looking at the good morning squat pattern. So I did an online consult with an athlete earlier this morning. We looked at her squats and videos of her under some heavy load. And as she came out of the bottom of the squat, we would always see her hip shoot up a little bit faster than her chest did. So she would go from a kind of squat positioning to a little bit more of like a good morning positioning. We call that the good morning squat. That typically indicates somebody has a little bit of weakness in their hips relative to their quads. And so for that individual, adding some quad work to their training routine will help them out. We'll also see that good morning squat, though, when we look at other populations as well. That same fault shows up when you walk into your waiting room and Doris has had a total knee replacement, and you ask Doris to come on back, and she stands up out of that waiting room chair by really leaning forward a ton and throwing her body weight over in front of her toes, getting into that good morning position, and then essentially hip hinging up. So we'll see that same fault there. We'll also see it maybe in somebody like post-op ACL when we first start working on them jumping. When they land from a jump, instead of really bending their knees a lot, they'll end up flexing at their trunk, flexing at their hip a lot, trying to use a more hip dominant strategy to control and absorb that force. That is a good morning squat, just demonstrated in a slightly different position there. But when I see that, we are for sure going to get after loading the quads a little bit more. Something that I like to look at a lot, so one thing I treat in the clinic a decent amount is post-op ACLs that are a good bit out. So I don't see a whole lot of people that are fresh out 1 week from surgery, but I do see a lot of athletes that are 3 months, 6 months, 2 years out from ACL reconstruction surgery and still having a lot of issues. Maybe chronically they're having issues with knee pain after that, or maybe they're 3 months out and they want to get a little bit more aggressive in their rehab and strengthening. And two tests that I like to do with these individuals. Number one, Y balance anterior reach. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the Y balance test. I don't have their big box contraption. Instead, I use just the anterior reach quite a bit. It's just an objective measurement for how far out in front they can go. And a lot of times when you look at that side to side, that individual is going to have significantly less anterior reach on that symptomatic side or that post-op side. And that's going to be because they don't have the ability to perform as good of a single leg squat on that side. They don't push their knee as far forward on that side as they're trying to kind of protect that joint a little bit and not load it as much. So I'm looking at that Y balance anterior reach. And then I also look at a lot of just single leg squats. So especially in like my post-op ACLs, late in their rehab, or if they're joining me 3+ months out from surgery, I will set a resistance band up in like the J cups of my squat rack, and I'll set it to a certain height. And I kind of usually put that right at knee level for that individual. And then I'll have their heel position just underneath that band, and I'll mark it because I want to be as standardized as possible with this test. So I mark where their heel is, and we do single leg squats on the asymptomatic side and on the symptomatic side. And I look for a couple things here. Number one, how many reps can they get side to side? Just the total quantity of reps there. Number two, I look for, maybe let's say they do 10 reps on each side. I will ask them how difficult, 0 to 10, how difficult was that on each side? And sometimes they'll give you a different RPE side to side there. Number three, I'm looking for the quality of movement. And very frequently what I'll see with that test is on the symptomatic side, the side that they had surgery on and they're having pain on, they will not push that knee near as far forward as they do on the asymptomatic side. They will demonstrate a fear of pushing that knee forward. And that to me would indicate that we're going to do a little bit more quad loading. When it comes to runners, when I'm looking at like a treadmill gait analysis, what will I see there? They'll often land with a really stiff knee, so they won't have much knee flexion. Or if they do have some knee flexion, we won't see it flex a whole lot as they go from initial contact to mid stance, indicating they're trying to maybe use a little bit more of a joint loading strategy there. And that's what I kind of look for in a gait analysis that might lead me to specifically putting a little extra volume on the quads for a runner. And then kind of the final thing I look at is quadricep muscle mass. So very frequently I'm pulling out a tape measure and I am measuring how much overall leg circumference that individual has at a couple different spots in the leg, and using that to diagnose if we need to focus a little bit on quad hypertrophy. You'll notice in there I did not say manual muscle testing, because I don't think with manual muscle testing of the quads we can get a whole lot of information, because even in people that are fairly weak, it's very hard to put enough force into them to break their legs. So I just don't think it's the best measurement for us in terms of actually assessing quad strength, or if we need to put some volume there. So that's what I use to kind of help me determine if maybe my loading of the lower extremity might need to be a little bit more biased towards the quadriceps versus the glutes or the hamstrings or the calf muscles. But now let's dive into a couple of exercises. What are the things that I most frequently end up prescribing to individuals when they are dealing with an issue and I feel like we need to load those quads up a little bit more? So first, leg extensions. I prescribe leg extensions actually a decent amount, especially in a lot of my more chronic post-surgery patients that I end up seeing as a second opinion a little later in their surgery. And I'm always very surprised when these individuals come to me. They're still dealing with some knee pain, but they are doing lunges, they're doing squats, they're doing some functional exercises and trying to progress there, but we have them isolate their quads and do leg extensions, and you'll just see some really weird stuff happen. You'll see their leg shaking like crazy. You'll see them just get fatigued super fast with a load on a leg extension machine, or banded leg extensions, or kettlebell leg extensions that you just wouldn't expect to be that challenging. You'll see them just get really weird with it. And I think a lot of times that's because their body just actually isn't recruiting the quadriceps as much as we think it is for those individuals when they're doing lunges and squats and those sorts of movements. So I end up prescribing leg extensions quite a bit in this population. A couple other exercises, step downs, whether that's forward step downs or lateral step downs. I do quite a bit, but there are a couple things that I very regularly find myself doing when I'm prescribing lateral step ups or forward step downs with individuals that I think need to bias towards their quads a little bit. So quite frequently I'm having to encourage them to push their knee forward. So let's say this is somebody that in that single leg squat test I described earlier is not pushing their knee forward very much. They're doing a much more of a hip hingey type movement with that. A lot of times I'm going to put a foam roller right in front of their toes, and I'm going to say, every rep that you do this lateral step down, I need your knee to touch the foam roller, and I give them that tactile cue for forward knees. A lot of times I'll elevate their heels a little bit, which will quite often help them feel their quadriceps a little bit more. Shifting that weight forward a lot of times gets the quads a little bit more involved. And I will say that I spend a lot of time on this working on hip drop, because a lot of individuals are going to demonstrate that hip drop compensation here to try to make up for the fact that they don't want to flex their knee very much. And so I'm going to really coach and cue them away from that. We're going to put hands on hips. I'm having them feel for that hip drop happening, or we go in front of a mirror so that they can see when that happens and have that visual feedback to correct it. I do a ton of goblet squat 1.5s. So we hold a kettlebell, or this could even be done with a front squat or dumbbells, and I have that individual squat all the way down to the maximal depth that they can hit, and then they start coming up. And the first rep we go pretty slow, and I say, I want you to start standing up, and as soon as you feel the tension in your quads decrease, I want you to stop and squat all the way back down. They hit full depth again and go all the way up. So it's full depth, usually ends up being about halfway up, full depth, all the way up. And what that does is it's just going to increase the time under tension of the quadriceps by doing that 1.5 reps. And you're very frequently with those goblet squats going to have those go from being just a general full lower body exercise to adding that little half rep in there, keeping more tension on the quads. Their quads will be burning like crazy, and they will get a significantly harder workout on the quadriceps than the lower body as a whole with that little variation. Again, I do very commonly find myself prescribing that with heels elevated, because for a lot of these individuals, having heels elevated helps them feel that in the quadriceps a little bit more. And I frequently do this one in front of a mirror for at least the first couple times they do it, because I like to give them the cue of keeping their torso really upright. So, and I won't say keep your torso upright. If they have like a logo on their shirt or writing on their shirt, as they're looking in the mirror, I'm going to say, I want you to see that logo the entire time. I'll give that external cue to have them keep a more upright torso, which will typically keep them from going into more of that good morning position that we discussed earlier, and keep a little bit more of that loading on the quadriceps. Next exercise, Spanish squats. If you're not familiar with Spanish squats, you got to play with these. They are an awesome quadricep exercise. So think of a squat, but in that top position, we have a resistance band behind both knees. So it's almost like the end of a terminal knee extension, or it pretty much is the end of a terminal knee extension. We're just in that standing position. The band being behind the knees is trying to flex the knees. So even at the top, the quadriceps are having to contract to keep the knees from flexing. So then as we squat down and sit back in that squat a little bit, we don't typically coach sit back in squats in the fitness athlete division, but with the Spanish squats, you do find that when people sit back, they get a little less knee pain and more quadricep activation with this specific variation. When they do that, then stand up with the band tension, resisting knee extension. It, just like the goblet squat 1.5s, is going to increase the time under tension on the quadriceps. It's going to make those work throughout the entire range of motion of the squat, versus typically at the top of the squat, the quads don't have to work quite as hard. So that's the opposite with a Spanish squat. So it makes for a killer quad exercise. If you're not using that in the clinic already, like, you're missing out on a fantastic movement right there. I do Spanish squats, both double leg and single leg versions there. They're an excellent movement to be doing. What's up, Heather? Next, skater squats. So skater squats, almost like a reverse lunge. But I'm really trying to emphasize using that back leg as little as possible. So quite often I'll have those individuals, as they reach back, plantar flex their leg, or plantar flex their ankle. So they're reaching back and they're just trying to land with their shin flat on the ground and kind of barely touch the ground and then stand up. If they land with a flat shin and they don't extend that back leg to kind of kick them up like it typically does with the reverse lunge, that will keep a little bit more loading on the quadriceps. And then we can progress to where they have their entire shin off the ground. They only go down to that back knee, barely touch that back knee, and then stand up. Those are two fairly difficult lower extremity variations that do tend to load the quads a little bit more than the hips. You can put Airex pads or pillows on the floor for that back leg if we need to raise that up a little bit, but I love skater squats. And then the final exercise that I'll discuss today are going to be rear foot elevated split squats. Sure, we're all familiar with rear foot elevated split squats, but I'll commonly say that when I cue that individual to really focus on pushing through their toes as they perform the rear foot elevated split squat, I still want their entire foot flat on the ground. But I just want them to think of pressing through their toes a little bit more than their heels. We'll very commonly feel that work the quads a little bit more versus the hips, and just makes for a good little tweak to load the quads a little bit more. Obviously, at ICE, we think back squats and front squats are great variations. They work the quads incredibly well. So those will certainly be part of my loading prescription for the quads at lots of different times for individuals. But I just wanted to share a few variations that I think specifically get after quad strength a little bit more than the back squat and front squat, especially in individuals that are pain limited or a little bit fearful of loading the knee joint. So I hope going through those variations gives you some new ideas from an exercise prescription standpoint, and look forward to seeing you on the road at fitness athlete courses and ICE physio courses overall in 2021. Hope everybody has a great day and a great weekend.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.